Hello everybody and welcome back to the Survival Chances Slim Summary Series. This episode covering cycles 11 through 20. What happened in the past 10 cycles of our maximum difficulty oxygen not included let's play. Well, let's cover the minor stuff first so we can focus on the major stuff later. The first minor thing is that we added, of course, 3 new duplicants to our base. Ellie, Camille, and Bubbles. Welcome to the crew, you guys. This is in keeping with our challenge of basically printing duplicants almost every single time one is offered to us. We'll take occasional breaks to pick up a care package, but we're trying to crank up our numbers very quickly. We've also gone around the map and dug out, in these little sort of exploratory tunnels, more of the buried objects around our map, around our starting biome. This has yielded us a lot of new mealwood seeds, which we have gone ahead and planted. And now we have 84 mealwood seeds planted, and that is roughly enough to supply the 9 duplicants that we have. Roughly 10 mealwood plants on this hardest difficulty setting will supply a single duplicant. We have 84, we're pretty close to 90. This is a lot better than we were before, where we basically had half of the plants necessary to sustain 6 duplicants. So we're doing pretty good on the food front, as long as we are able to keep the mealwood under the right conditions. So over 150 grams of pressure, atmosphere of a normal type, and a body temperature under 30 degrees Celsius, which is going to be part of the tricky part. As long as we're able to keep that, we should be good on food going forward. We've also, to that end of keeping our farms nice and cool, we've started setting up some insulated tile. Beyond here, we have really hot, like 75 degree sand. We need to set up some sort of barrier between that and our nice sub 30 degree farms if we want to keep these things running. So we've set up a little bit down here near our farming area. We set up some up top over here where we had kind of dug out to grab some sand for our water sieve. And we've also started up a new sort of industrial area, which I'm about to get to, and we've set up some insulated tile where we dug to the hot sand over here. So we've set up some little barriers to try and keep the hot desert sand and all that heat out of our base. This isn't the most effective of insulation, right? This is 0.02 thermal conductivity, which is not that great for insulation. I mean, it's good. It's better than nothing, right? It's certainly better than like aluminum, which has a thermal conductivity of 20.5. But we're going to need maybe a little bit more going forward to keep our base cool from the heat that's seeping in. In any case, the major development in our colony, though, ignoring the insulation, the farming, the adding new duplicants, the new research, etc. We've gotten a few more of these research things done. Not too many, because we need to be very specific with what we research, because we have very little in the way of water supplies. The major thing that's happened to our colony over the past 10 cycles is that we've more or less run out of oxygen. We have, of course, some breathable oxygen up here. We have pockets of pretty good oxygen down here. We have some little other pockets that we can break into, right? This is pretty good pressure down here, right? Around 5 kilograms per tile. But we have more or less run out of all the oxalite tiles that were around here and supplying our duplicants. And so now, the only thing really generating any oxygen for our base are these oxyferns, and they generate very little. This one, because we just recently loaded from save, is saying 0. This one is saying 3.5 grams per second of oxygen. Not very much. Even at max capacity, we need roughly 12 wild oxyferns to support a single duplicant. We don't happen to have 72 oxyferns lying around our map, so we could domesticate these, but that takes water, so we're kind of in a tricky situation. We don't have much of the resources that are necessary to produce oxygen in sort of the normal ways. We start off with no algae, there's no slime, we have very limited amounts of water, so electrolysis isn't really a good option. We also have no rust, no salt, so we can't use rust deoxidizers. So algae terrariums, oxygen diffusers, rust deoxidizers, electrolysis, all these tools are more or less off the table for us until we can set up some sort of industry to generate the resources that we need. And that's where this ethanol industry comes into play that we have set up over here. There's kind of 4 components to it. I'm going to go over each one in turn. The first and most critical component, of course, is the ethanol distiller. The ethanol distiller, this number is wrong because we just loaded from a save, but the ethanol distiller will consume 1,000 grams per second of lumber and 240 watts of power, and it will output 500 grams per second of ethanol, 1/3 of a kilogram per second of polluted dirt, and then half that of carbon dioxide. It'll also output a decent amount of heat at 4.5 kilodTUs. So these ethanol distillers take in lumber, which, as long as we're growing it wild, is more or less a free resource, and generates 2 important things for us. The first is the ethanol, which we are then going to run in these petroleum generators, but the second, which should be overlooked, is the polluted dirt. 1/3 of a kilogram per second of polluted dirt is, in theory, enough oxygen to supply around 3 duplicants, right? A duplicant consumes 100 grams per second of oxygen, and polluted dirt sublimates directly from polluted dirt to polluted oxygen. So in theory, each of these ethanol distillers can supply 3 duplicants, in fact a little bit more than that, with their oxygen, their daily breathing needs. Unfortunately, the rate of sublimation between polluted dirt and polluted oxygen is very slow, to the extent that you need roughly 2.5 tons of polluted dirt just to supply 1/10 of what is necessary for a duplicant to breathe. So we're producing out of these ethanol distilleries, right, 1/3 of a kilogram each per second, 6 of them in total. We're producing 2 kilograms per second of polluted dirt, which means every day, because there's 600 seconds in a oxygen not included day, every day we're producing 600 times that, right? We're producing basically 1.2 tons. Again, we need roughly 25 tons to supply the oxygen for a single duplicant. So roughly every 20 cycles, these ethanol distillers are going to generate enough polluted dirt that if we just stuck that polluted dirt somewhere and let it off gas into polluted oxygen, we would have enough to sustain 1 duplicant. Now that might be fine if our duplicant numbers were staying small. We could just kind of run the system for a while, generate more polluted dirt, continue on that way. But we're printing out a new duplicant roughly once every 3 to 4 cycles, so we're going to need something that produces oxygen just a little bit faster in order to accomplish that. And that's where these petroleum generators come into play. These petroleum generators, each one can consume 2 kilograms per second of ethanol. Now, we haven't quite set up 4 kilograms per second of ethanol production over here, but we have set up 2 petroleum generators, and we also have this liquid valve controlling the flow into these petroleum generators, so we can set sort of how often we're running these. And I like this setup a little bit better than like a smart battery, because we're mostly interested in getting the byproducts from this petroleum generator. The power is nice to have, but mainly what we care about is that this petroleum generator, and I'll go ahead and look at power petroleum generator. This petroleum generator consumes 2 kilograms per second of ethanol, but releases 750 grams per second of polluted water. Now, in theory, as long as we're not domesticating any of the arbor trees to get our lumber to supply the ethanol distilleries, as long as we're not putting in any water into getting the lumber, then we're getting all of this polluted water for free. And 750 grams per second of polluted water is ultimately going to be about roughly 7 dupes worth of oxygen if we were to run that through an electrolyzer. So with 2 of these petroleum generators, if they're running off of free resources the entire time, we should be able to support our entire population of duplicants off of this ethanol production. Now, of course, the trick is that we have to ask the question, do we have enough of these wild trees to sustain this level of ethanol distilleries? And the answer is not quite. We would need, basically for every one of these ethanol distillers, we either need 1 domesticated tree or 4 wild trees, and we're just a little bit shy of having 24 of these arbor trees around our map, right? There's 4 over here, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If we count them all up, we're just a little bit under 2 dozen. So one of the things we're going to need to do as well is try and encourage the pips in our base to grab seeds and generate seeds from wild arbor trees and go ahead and plant new arbor trees. That's something that we're going to hope happens over the future. I'm not terribly familiar with pip AI, so we're just going to hope that they are able to do that. But generating more wild arbor trees and bringing a few of them under domestication just to kind of keep this loop going and keep generating the polluted dirt is going to be something that we're interested in the future. So basically the way the system works, though, is we're taking lumber, we're throwing it in these ethanol distilleries, and then we are taking the ethanol and having it all pumped out to first this liquid reservoir, and then we control the flow through a liquid valve to these 2 petroleum generators. So we can kind of control how often we're running, or to what extent we're running these petroleum generators, right? What their capacity factor is just with this liquid valve. And that is going to be how we generate polluted water. Some of this polluted water we are going to start putting into these carbon skimmer loops, however, because one of the effects of the petroleum generator and the ethanol distiller is that they both produce a pretty large amount of carbon dioxide. A running petroleum generator will generate 500 grams per second of carbon dioxide. A running ethanol distiller, of which we have 6, will produce basically 1/6 of a kilogram per second of carbon dioxide. So overall, if we were running all of this, we'd be generating 2 kilograms per second of carbon dioxide. Every second, we would be filling up one tile on this map with 2 kilograms of gas, right? Which is going to basically force out every single other gas it's not going to be too many seconds, right? 600 seconds in a day before we start filling up our entire map with carbon dioxide. Now, that isn't a terribly bad thing at the moment because, and that's why we have built these, we're building these carbon skimmers last, because we need the air pressure around our mealwood to be high enough. We already see that some of these are halted due to pressure. They have air pressure, well, this one's just kind of a little bit wrong, but we need air pressure between 150 grams and 10 kilograms. So we need the CO2 to kind of replace the oxygen that we're consuming in the system. So we're fine kind of leaving these carbon skimmers out, but eventually we're going to need to get these carbon skimmers on. Each one of these carbon skimmers is going to be able to take 300 grams per second of carbon dioxide and more or less delete it. And it does that by converting water into polluted water. And so we're going to fill up these liquid reservoirs with just a little bit of water to kind of get the system running. And then we're going to create a closed loop. That way we have these water sieves, which will also generate a little bit of polluted dirt for us, sieving up that polluted water into clean water, running it through these carbon skimmers, and then looping it back around to be sieved back into clean water and repeat the process. Right now, we've kind of set things up where we're going to input our polluted water from this plumbing that we have down here, right? We're generating the polluted water so that we can get something to get the system going in the first place. You need some water in the system to start it. But basically the idea is that here we have our input line for clean water. It goes down here. These bridges then bridge it to the input ports of these carbon skimmers that we're going to build, and then the output ports will then be bridged off into a central output line, which goes into this tank. And then we're going to take the output from this tank, loop it back around into the inputs over here, and take the outputs from here and loop them back around to the inputs over here, and make a closed loop for the system. We have 8 carbon skimmers in total. These 8 carbon skimmers will generate, or will be able to delete 2.4 kilograms of carbon dioxide per second. And again, the maximum amount of carbon dioxide we're going to get out of these is going to be 2 kilograms per second. So these carbon skimmers are going to be able to delete all the carbon dioxide that we want in our base. They're going to be able to keep up with all this, and they're going to be able to delete any excess carbon dioxide that we decide we don't want in our base. We can kind of toggle on and off these carbon skimmers, just have a dupe run and disable them if we don't want them to run, to kind of control how much CO2 we're letting in through here, depending upon what pressure needs we have. But that's the general idea of the system. So we have all the ethanol flowing out over here that turns into carbon dioxide and polluted water. The polluted water drops down here. We have a liquid pump then pumping it into this system to get this running. But then eventually this liquid pump will then pump to somewhere else. We'll take this excess polluted water, sieve it up into clean water, and run that through electrolysis to get more oxygen for our base. So we're going to be using the polluted water, one, to start up the system, but then to start electrolysis and get more oxygen for our base. We're going to be getting the polluted dirt out of our ethanol distillers. That'll also help with our oxygen situation. We'll be able to delete the carbon dioxide just using simple closed loops with these carbon skimmers and water sieves. And we have the power to power all of this using these petroleum generators. Each one is going to generate, if they're running full time, 2 kilowatts. We basically have enough to run 1.5 of these, right? And we can control how much power is generated with this liquid valve. Each of these ethanol distillers is going to consume 240 watts, right? So we're looking at 1.5 kilowatts in total for all these, roughly speaking. Each of these carbon skimmers is going to be 120 watts, so we're looking at another 1.2 kilowatts over here, a little bit extra for this liquid pump, and then the excess is going into the fourth component of our system, which is the ice makers. Each of these buildings is going to generate heat, right? These petroleum generators are going to generate, when they're running, 20 kilodTUs. These ethanol distillers are going to generate 4.5 kilodTUs. The water sieve, when it's running, is going to generate how much? Another 4 kilodTUs. If we go to the carbon skimmers, each of these carbon skimmers is going to generate a kilodTU per second. So we need to be able to get rid of that heat, and that's what we have these ice makers for. Now, these ice makers themselves generate a pretty good amount of heat, right? Each of these will generate 16 kilodTUs per second. But I believe if I've kind of done the numbers correctly, each one of these should also cool down or delete 36 kilodTUs per second of heat. So we have a little bit of excess cooling over here because we need to keep some of the heat out from over here. We're going to kind of need to figure out a cooling solution for just inside our insulated area. But we have a number of ice makers, and these are very cheap in terms of power, only 60 watts apiece. These ice makers are going to generate the ice necessary to cool down all these other components. Now, right now we have it basically where this is just going to cool down itself. We're going to grab water from our little reservoir over here. We're going to put it into these ice makers. These ice makers are going to generate ice. We're then going to take that ice, build it into temp shift plates. Those temp shift plates will melt. The water will go back down here, and then they'll be able to use this pitcher pump to grab that water and put it back into these ice makers. So a very labor-intensive operation, but one that should be able to cover all of the heat generation that we have in this system over here, and then a little bit extra to kind of cover some of the problems that we have in keeping the heat out from the rest of our base. We're already seeing that some of these areas we're probably just going to have to give up on, like this little sort of peninsula of starting biome is going to be heated up a little bit too quickly. But we want to kind of grab as much of this area and keep it for ourselves as possible. And as we generate more water and are able to be a little bit more cavalier with where we set up these ice temp shift plates and allow them to melt, we're going to be able to kind of explore out other areas by cooling them down using that ice and keeping them cool using that ice. And get them to a temperature where our duplicants can reasonably go out there and find new resources for our base. So those are the major changes. This has taken a little while, a little bit longer than I'd hoped. I'd hoped to keep these episodes down to 5 minutes, but there's just a lot of stuff to explain, so it's going to take a little bit longer. But that's the basic gist of what's happened in the past 10 cycles. Expanded our farms, added new duplicants, increased our research, set up some insulation, and then created this large ethanol distillery where we create ethanol, burn that in petroleum generators, generate water, use that water for electrolysis, skim the carbon out of this whole system, delete the heat that the system creates, and basically utilize the wild lumber that we're able to grow on our map as a resource to ultimately generate more oxygen for our base. Because that, of course, is going to be a pretty big problem going forward. All right, that's it for the episode. Hopefully I got this short enough for what people are looking for. I just don't know another way to go faster. And that's it, and I'll see you guys next time.